All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I'm giving you my rapid reaction to the Falcons' 30-20 loss to the New Orleans Saints in Week 18, talking about the highs and lows of that game and how what we saw on Sunday may impact the Falcons' offseason moves.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by OnlineGambling.com, the place to be for all the latest gambling news and tips throughout the NFL playoffs. Visit OnlineGambling.com/NFL to get the edge over the competition throughout this year's playoffs. So today's episode is, of course, a rapid reaction where I am coming to you a few hours after the Falcons' Week 18 loss to the New Orleans Saints by a score of 30-20. We'll talk about the struggles of the Falcons, how the team failed to match the Saints' intensity, resulting in a loss. Fortunately for the Falcons, that loss was followed by a celebration with the 49ers beating the Rams, knocking the Saints out of the playoffs. We'll get into that and give you a game summary. We'll get into some grades for the various phases of the game, the offense, defense, and special teams. And then we'll talk a little bit about Matt Ryan's impending return to Atlanta, but also some of the other big names that the Falcons could be parting ways with this offseason and some of the changes that we expect to see, some of the positions of need and priority that we'll see this offseason as we head into the offseason now that the Falcons finish with their fourth consecutive losing season with a 7-10 record. So getting into that game summary, the question about this game was whether or not the Falcons would be able to match the Saints' intensity. We knew that the Saints would come in, would play hard. They had a reason to come out here and play a good game of football to win in order to keep their playoff hopes alive. We know that the Falcons generally have struggled in the Sean Payton era going back the last, 15, 16 years to beat the Saints. We know that the Falcons have struggled against Taysom Hill as a starter. Who's 2-0 based off of his starts last year. So everything told us going into this game that we would expect a Saints win. So for me, kind of my expectations, my hopes, I guess you could say, going into this game was that Arthur Smith would be able to kind of change the narrative, see if he can get this team motivated to match the Saints' intensity and beat this team and play an inspiring day of football for this Falcon team. Frankly, the Falcons were able to beat pretty much the same Saints roster 9 weeks ago on the road. So it seemed like, they should be able to beat this team. This Sunday they were down Teron Armstead. They were down Mark Ingram, who played in that Week 9 game. The only real player that changed was Taysom Hill started today versus Trevor Siemian last time. And it's not fair to necessarily boil a season down to one game. But this game, we could have used it as a litmus test to see how much growth this team has shown under Arthur Smith and to basically, if the Falcons were able to do those things and match the intensity of the Saints and beat the Saints today, we could legitimately potentially say that this is not the same old Falcons. Well, of course, if that was the litmus test, they failed that test. Not only did the Falcons not match the Saints' intensity, they had a sloppy performance thanks to 3 turnovers. That doesn't even count a 4th and 2 turnover on downs on their second possession of the second half on a very questionable Arthur Smith play call. So you didn't get the intensity. You got a questionable 4th and short yardage play call, and you went for the Arthur Smith cycle with a bad challenge in the fourth quarter. That questionable play call was a shovel pass / screen to Cordarrelle Patterson that was batted down by Cam Jordan, and it was kind of a little baffling to go to seemingly your 7th best offensive player in that situation. But it's not to really pile on Arthur Smith, after today's loss, it just feels like a really missed opportunity, and the Falcons weren't really ever in this game. The Saints got the ball to start the game, marched down the field on a 10-play scoring drive, capped off with a 18-yard Adam Troutman reception for a touchdown where he beat Deion Jones, who was covering him, and that was a rough series for Deion Jones. Had a couple of missed tackles. Then the Falcons went on a 10-play drive of their own, ending with a 48-yard field goal from Younghoe Koo, thanks to Matt Ryan being sacked by Marcus Davenport and David Onyemata on a stunt on third down. The Saints would have gone up, 10-7 or 10-3 on their ensuing series, but they missed a 34-yard chip shot from their kicker, Brett Maher. Then the Falcons got a big play from Olamide Zaccheaus that set up another long Koo field goal. Again, a third down pressure, stopping that drive, where they were able to get, the Saints were able to get pressure on a twist, on a blitz from Demario Davis. Then on the Saints ensuing drive, they converted 3 third downs to go up 14-6 with another touchdown. They lost Taysom Hill on that drive. He suffered a foot injury on that drive. Trevor Siemian came in, and then on his second pass after entering the game, hit Traquan Smith on a 13-yard touchdown pass. Then Matt Ryan on the opening play of the ensuing drive threw an interception, trying to throw a deep ball to Russell Gage. Paulson Adebo made a highlight reel one-handed grab on the interception, and the Saints turned that turnover into 3 points. The Falcons then followed that up with another one-play drive where they threw a pass to Mike Davis. He fumbled deep in their own territory, and then Siemian only needed 3 plays before he hit Jawan Johnson for a 5-yard touchdown on a blown coverage to give the Saints a 24-6 halftime lead. And you thought, okay, well, maybe the Falcons can get back into it into the third quarter. Well, they started off with a 3-and-out. Then the defense finally did get a stop thanks to a turnover on downs at midfield. I'm sorry. And the Saints got stuffed on a QB sneak on a 4th-and-1. Then the Falcons followed that up with a turnover on downs on their own on the aforementioned failed 4th-and-2 shovel pass at the Saints 8-yard line. And then after a Saints punt, the Falcons got the ball back. Matt Ryan hit Hayden Hurst on a big play, 33-yard strike down the sideline. 2 plays later, Cordarrelle Patterson rumbled into the end zone on a 19-yard run. And that cut the lead to 24-13 near the end of the third quarter. Of course, the Falcons needed to get another stop and then failed to get one, with the defense continuing to struggle on this day. Saints went on a 13-play scoring drive capped off by another Brett Maher field goal. Falcons would then fumble on another opening play of their ensuing drive. That was the 3rd time this game. Another Mike Davis fumble on a screen pass. The Saints would capitalize with another field goal off of that turnover, and then the Falcons would finally cap off the game with one last scoring drive after they got the ball back with 4 minutes left in the game. Thanks mostly to Matt Ryan just feeding Russell Gage at that point in the game. Matt Ryan hit 7 of 11 passes on that drive alone, 5 of them going to Russell Gage for a combined 71 yards, including a 1-yard touchdown pass. The Falcons followed that up with a successful 2-point conversion to Tajay Sharp at the back of the end zone, but it would be negated on a holding call by Jake Matthews. Sharp was also flagged. That penalty was, that flag was picked up due to the holding call, but he was also flagged for an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty where he tried to shove the ball into the face of CJ Gardner-Johnson after he scored. CJGJ, as they call him. It just put another notch on his belt for getting into the head of another opposing receiver that drew a flag or whatever the case may be. That guy is straight up a psychopath. I don't know what he is saying to people, but the world hates him outside of the city of New Orleans. But after that, the Saints got the ball back. They just had to kneel down to get the win. After that, failed 2-point conversion, the Falcons had to kick a extra point after that 2-point conversion got negated. So the final score was 30-20 instead of 30-21. So the good thing is that it looked like the Saints were potentially going to make the playoffs, but that only lasted about 15 minutes before the 49ers sealed their overtime win over the Rams with an interception from Ambry Thomas that sealed that victories, knocking the Saints out of the playoffs and the 49ers getting that last playoff spot. So the Falcons finished 7-10. We know that they'll be picking 8th overall in the draft. So those tankers out there that were hoping that the Falcons would lose and the Saints would get knocked out of the playoffs, if Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers took care of business, you were able to have your cake and eat it too. and we'll continue to have our cake on today's Locked On Falcons podcast. We'll get into the game grades, talking about the pass offense, rush offense, pass defense, rush defense, and special teams. And I'll hand out grades, and we'll talk about the various performances today and maybe how that will affect potential offseason moves in terms of those various areas of the roster. But we're talking about cake. It's the start of a new year. I know a lot of people are cutting back on their cake because they want to eat healthier. Well, if you want that healthier lifestyle, there's no better way than to start by checking out Built Bars. Built Bars are the best tasting protein bar on the market. And they're taste better than cake because they taste just like a candy bar, but they're healthy too. They're low in sugar, low in calories, low in carbs, low in fat, high in protein, high in fiber. So they're much, much healthier than cake. You get the best of both worlds, both delicious and healthy. And now if you head over to built.com, you can get a 50% off sale on all Built Bites. If you love those bite-sized versions of the regular Built Bars, they are all going away now, and there's a 50% off clearance sale now available at built.com. You can get them in a variety of flavors. Of course, they always have great flavors at built.com. So go check them out. Build your own box. Choose your favorite flavor, whatever that is, by heading over to built.com. And when you do, use the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So while Built Bar is giving you that edge for a healthier lifestyle, you might be looking for an edge in other ways, and onlinegambling.com is the website dedicated to giving gamblers that edge, inspiring you to beat the odds throughout the playoffs. They're providing you with the best NFL tips, news, and more to help you make your bets as informed as ever. Go to onlinegambling.com and check out the latest NFL playoff news and tips on how you can get that edge. Don't make emotional decisions with your hard-earned dollars. Make informed decisions with information sourced by experts. Visit the website before placing your bets. Make sure you visit onlinegambling.com/NFL for all the latest gambling news and tips to give you the edge throughout the playoffs. Remember, onlinegambling.com/NFL to make the most of this year's playoffs. So getting into the game grades, let's start with the pass offense. I gave them a C minus. Not a great Matt Ryan game, but certainly you could blame the supporting cast for letting him down somewhat. Pass protection wasn't quite there. The receivers didn't seem to be getting open. We'll see what the film says, but it just was not a great overall game for the passing offense. They got a couple of explosive plays, but outside of that, they really didn't do a really credible job moving the football. The pass protection wasn't terrible. They gave up 9 hits in this game and 3 sacks. But I won't compare. Let's be honest. It wasn't a good performance for the pass protection, but relative to what we have seen from Falcons, Saints in past games where the Saints are getting like 5, 6, or even 8 sacks in some of these games, like it wasn't that bad. And it kind of starts with Kaleb McGary. We got to go make a trip to the island, but he kind of held his ground against Cameron Jordan. Cameron Jordan was pretty quiet in this game for the first like 3.5 quarters. Now he went off on that final drive where the Saints could pin their ears back because the Falcons were in pass mode. And so that's where McGary started to get overwhelmed. But up until that point, McGary seemed to hold his own. The interior struggled. Colby Gossett got the start in the replacement for Jalen Mayfield, who was dealing with a back injury. From watching the game live, it didn't look like Gossett played particularly well. Jake Matthews also had his fair share of struggles in this game. You know, Obviously, I know you guys are going to accuse me of being biased, but despite that rough final drive for Kaleb McGary, again, putting together basically like 56 good to decent minutes against Cameron Jordan, I don't know if the Falcons, based off of that, are going to necessarily be rushing out to replace him this offseason. Certainly, I think they should bring in some competition. I don't think they should be handing him any starting spots next summer or anything like that. But I don't feel like right tackle, based off of today's game, if we're looking at this as another sort of sign of progress that we've been talking about all season long that McGary has shown, I feel like this game, the fact that Cameron Jordan didn't have a monster game at all this season, is legitimate progress for Kaleb McGary. So it feels like, that's the direction that they may go. But again, this regime may feel completely differently about that and may feel like, no, like Kaleb McGary, even though he played decent in this final game, that's not going to be good enough for us to accomplish the goals that we want to do next season. So we'll see how that goes. If you were hoping that Kyle Pitts would break the record on Sunday, he did not. I think he needed like 59 yards or whatever to break Mike Ditka's all-time record for a rookie tight end. He wound up with 8 yards on 2 catches. Kind of figured he would be limited given the hamstring injury. He got limited practice and was questionable going into the game. Thought he would play, thought he would be on a pitch count, and it seemed like that's what the Falcons did. There were a number of plays where they were asking him to block as opposed to running routes. So that kind of told you that the Falcons knew he wasn't going to be fully integrated into the game plan. Russell Gage was the one standout receiver in this game. You did get some big plays from Zacchaeus and Hurst, but outside of those 1 or 2 plays, you didn't see a whole lot from those guys. Gage was up and down as he often is. He has some really good plays. He has some negative plays. He had those 5 catches for 71 yards on that final possession to finish with the team high 9 catches for 126 yards and a touchdown. Moving on to the run offense, I gave it a C+. Unfortunately, because the Falcons fell into an early hole, the running game just really had no positive impact on their game. When they did run the ball, they were effective and efficient. They finished with a success rate of 64% on 11 design runs. They had a yards per carry of 5.5, thanks to that 19-yard run by Oluokun, sort of boosting their average. But Davis had 2 fumbles on pass plays. But he was pretty effective when he got opportunities to run the football. Cordarrelle Patterson exited the game around halftime. I don't think there was an official statement on his status or whatever the case may be, but he's been nursing, that I think it was the ankle injury that he had against Dallas, and he's been kind of getting days of rest every single week since then, and been in and out of the lineup and whatnot, and had limited roles and whatnot. And Davis has mostly taken advantage of those opportunities because he's gotten a little bit more opportunities over the last 4 or 5 weeks, and I really felt like he's taken advantage of those opportunities and played particularly well down the stretch. And of course, today's game just, kind of was a terrible way to cap off what had been kind of a resurgent, month of December and January for Mike Davis, to the point that I felt like he was probably going to be on his way back. Now, he was on the bubble, I think, going into this offseason, and today's game with the fumbles may tip it in the wrong direction for him. And it's crazy because like Mike Davis has been as sure-handed when it comes to ball security throughout his career. He had like 500 career touches going into this season and only 2 fumbles. And this year he had like 180 touches and 4 fumbles, including the 2 today. So, it was just bad fumbles throughout the season. And one, crunch time earlier in the season, and then the 2 ones this on opening plays of drives and whatnot. So we'll see what happens with him. I think he's under contract next year, Davis, but he could be a cap cut. That will be a way for the Falcons to free up money. But I don't necessarily think the Falcons are going to cut him until they are solidify what their situation with Cordarrelle Patterson is. I don't see the Falcons cutting Davis and then putting themselves in a position, if Patterson does walk, that they have basically Quadri Oluokun as the only running back under contract heading into the offseason. I don't see that happening. So if they can re-sign Patterson before free agency starts, then I could see Davis definitely getting cut at the start of the offseason, but we'll just sort of have to see about that. I do I'm optimistic that the Falcons will be able to re-sign Cordarrelle Patterson. But, today and really the last month of the season in his sort of injury status does sort of play a factor in. I don't think it's going to be a situation where this is going to stop the Falcons from signing him. But when you hear me talk about regression and whatnot that he's probably going to be due to have next year, it's stuff like this that I'm thinking about, that, he's going to be 31 next year. We know that older players have much more trouble recovering from these nagging injuries that Patterson clearly has been dealing with for like the last, 8 weeks or whatever the case may be. So, that's going to play a part in his status, or it shouldn't necessarily play a part in whether or not the Falcons bring him back. It should play a part in what the Falcons plan to do with him next season. They shouldn't necessarily go into next season putting too many eggs in the Cordarrelle Patterson basket, is basically what I'm sitting here saying. So I expect the Falcons, whether they keep Mike Davis or not, to go with a young running back with fresh legs this offseason. That was a position that we thought that they should have drafted last year. They did not. They punted on that. So I don't expect them to punt there. And if you're curious on the directional running because of the injury to Mayfield, the Falcons did decide to run more to the right. It seemed to pay off for them. They had 3 runs to the left, 3 runs up the middle, and 5 runs to the right on their design runs. Their success rate running to the left was 33%, up the middle was 67%, and to the right it was 80%. Moving on to the pass defense, a D plus. You know, uh, the pass defense wasn't terrible, but it just it seemed like Hill and Simeon just really had no problems with the Saints, who, when people talk about the Falcons having the worst group of receivers in the league, it's the Saints that have the worst group of receivers in the league, but it didn't look like it. Guys like Callaway was kept in check, but Little Jordan Humphrey and Jawan Johnson and Traquan Smith, they all, the Saints didn't throw the ball that much, but when they did, they were effective at doing so. No quarterback hits for the Falcons defense today. The only sack was a technicality, a team sack where Trevor Siemian stumbled on his drop back, and that counted as a team sack. So that kind of feels like a perfect way to summarize the Falcons' terrible pass rush, that they were gifted a sack because of a clumsy quarterback this season. And so they finished the season with, I think, 17, or now I think maybe 18 sacks, which is the lowest in the league. Not nearly as bad as the Raiders in 2018, the year that they traded Khalil Mack, when they had only 13 sacks that season. And they went out the following offseason, invested in their pass rush in the draft with Cleveland Farrell in round 1, Max Crosby in round 4, and Quentin Bell in round 7. Quentin Bell, by the way, is on the Falcons practice squad right now. They also signed Benson Mayowa. I expect the Falcons to probably invest a little bit more resources into it, certainly in the draft, but all probably in free agency, which the Raiders failed to do that all season. We already heard Dean Pease mention in his press conference last Thursday that the 2 positions, the 2 areas that he wanted to get better on defensively this offseason was enhancing the pass rush, and the other one being enhancing the man coverage. And the Falcons were able to man up the Saints receivers in week 9. They were not able to do that this week. Fabian Monroe had a rough outing. He's been a player that I thought has done a pretty decent job for the most part this season. Not great, but solid for the most part, but had 2 bad penalties in this game and then gave up a touchdown as well. So moving on to the run defense in F. We knew the Falcons needed to stop the run in order to have a chance to win this game. They did not do that. The Saints had 189 rushing yards on 42 design runs. They had a success rate of 62%. Kamara absolutely killed them. 60% success rate on 30 runs. They did have a couple of tackles for loss and a couple of stuffs here or there, but it seemed like to come, between like 4 or 5 consecutive, good runs for the Saints, where the Saints were able to move the ball at will with their running game. So this is an area I also expect the Falcons to try to beef up this offseason, which is why I think, the defensive line is going to take priority over the secondary when it comes to their offseason moves, just because not only you want to get better in the pass rush, but you also want to beef up against the run. But that also includes maybe making some changes at the linebacker position. We've been talking for a while now that Deion Jones potentially is going to be on the trade block. Foye Oluokun is a free agent. I think the Falcons going to try to bring Oluokun back. I don't know if they're going to bend over backwards to make Oluokun as big a priority on defense as, say, Cordarrelle Patterson is going to be on offense. We'll see. A lot of fuss is going to be made about Oluokun's 192 tackles that he had this year, and maybe that was the league lead. I don't know. I don't really care about tackle stats. That's why I don't know. I don't really pay attention to it. But he had a team high 13 tackles today, but only 2 of those were stops against the run. Meaning the vast majority of his tackles were, down the field and weren't necessarily being impactful, at least in the running game, and certainly weren't being impactful in the passing game. And I don't want to say that that's like been typical of the types of games he's had this season. But I would sit here and say that before anybody starts putting Foye Oluokun's 2021 season on a pedestal, in terms of the spectrum of past Falcon linebackers that had a lot of tackles, whether, you have Paul Warlow at one end, Jesse Tuggle at the other end, Foye Oluokun somewhere in the middle, but maybe he's veering closer to the Paul Warlow side of the table. But, that being said, I do think Oluokun did play well in the second half of the season, and certainly embodies more of the principles that Dean Pease seems to be preaching on defense, which is physicality, smarts, toughness, being that do your job type of player. So I do think the Falcons will definitely try to bring him back, but we'll just sort of have to see if other teams look at these tackle stats and say, look, we're going to pay that guy a whole bunch of money or whatever the case may be. So we'll just see how that goes. And if that's the case, then in addition, to similar to what we're talking about with the offense, where we know offensive line is going to be a priority, but given the status of Calvin Ridley, wide receiver also going to be a priority. We know the defensive line is going to be a priority in defense, but if they wind up losing Foye Oluokun, then potentially linebacker is also going to be a position of higher priority than I think a lot of people are expecting right now. So we'll see how that goes. The last phase we'll talk about is special teams, giving them a B+. Once again, special teams, best part of the team. Koo was great. Morstead was solid. Williams did some nice things on the return. The coverage units did their jobs. Not quite enough overall for me to give them like an A grade, but certainly a B+. They've been the MVPs of this roster for like 8 weeks in a row. So certainly I think the goal should be to retain all of the Falcon specialists, Koo, Harris, and Thomas Morstead this offseason. If they don't, then we're going to have some major problems. We might be, getting the pitchforks and the torches ready to march on Flowery Branch if that's the case. So that will leave it for us with the grades. We'll sort of wrap up today's episode talking a little bit about Matt Ryan and him returning, as well as the other big four guys in terms of contracts and what the Falcons do with Jake Matthews, Calvin Ridley, Deion Jones, and Grady Jarrett this offseason as we get geared up for the offseason. But before we get there, guys, I want to let you know and thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including on Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify. And of course, now Locked On Falcons is free and available on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So when you guys are driving around in Atlanta, you're in that bumper to bumper traffic and you're watching their gas gauge, just slowly dip down, and you're sitting there, man, I'm spending way too much money on gas. Well, why not get some cash back every time you head to the pump? And you can with a free app called Get Upside. When you open an account at Get Upside and use our special promo code Touchdown, you get a bonus 25 cents back on top of the 25 cents back per gallon that you're going to get every time you fill up. The other day I had to fill up, and so I opened the app, went to see what the nearest gas station was. It was 5 minutes away, was able to drive down the street, fill up, got, a big cash back. You can get money put on, you're directly paid into your bank account. You can get them on PayPal. I like to get it on my Amazon gift cards. So definitely sign up for Get Upside so that you can save money every time you head to the pump. Again, if you sign up with the promo code Touchdown, you get a bonus 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents back per gallon. So don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Download the free Get Upside app on the App Store or on Google Play and use the promo code Touchdown when you sign up. That's Get Upside, promo code Touchdown, to start saving every time you fill up. So if you missed the news that broke Sunday afternoon, ESPN's Chris Mortensen said that Matt Ryan is going to be back in 2022. This broke before the Falcons game on Sunday against the Saints, and that figures. The expectation was that Matt Ryan would be back. That's what Tori McElhaney said on a recent guest spot on the podcast this past, Wednesday, I think it was, where Tori came on the show. And, that's been my sort of mindset, that the Falcons would retain Matt Ryan into next season, but it wasn't necessarily guaranteed in my eyes. A trade would have been tough for the Falcons, particularly before June 1st, just because it would have required them to take a huge dead money cap hit. And unless a team was willing to make it worth their while in terms of their draft, picks that they would give up for Matt Ryan, which seemed unlikely given the type of season that Matt Ryan is having and his age, that seemed very unlikely. But you never know. We would, potentially, if other teams struck out on Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson, then maybe Matt Ryan's trade value market would go up, or whatever the case may be. A lot of people have been talking about a post June 1 trade, but again, that seemed very unlikely. I've been talking about that since last offseason, that you would unlikely see a team wait until June to acquire their starting quarterback. Basically, you'd be betting on like a post-draft season-ending injury to a starter, and the team would get desperate, like a playoff team, a team like the Colts or somebody like that. We're like, oh no, we're screwed. Let's go out there and trade for Matt Ryan to give us another a chance to compete this year or something like that. And that seemed like a long shot always. So it figured the Falcons would not trade Matt Ryan, but I figured they would also take phone calls if someone was going to, at least, they would listen to offers, and you would probably hear the same rhetoric that they gave last year when people asked them about what was Matt Ryan's status, and they would be like, give that non-answer, like, oh, it's hard to predict the future. We like Matt Ryan, but we don't know what the future is going to hold, and that whole sort of thing. Um, but the fact that they're already putting out there that Matt Ryan is staying probably means that they're not going to be taking those phone calls. So I still think the Falcons will probably draft a quarterback this year, probably on day 2 of the draft, but we'll see how that goes. Basically, now we're just sort of counting down the days till I think March 11th, when Matt Ryan's roster bonuses are due, before the Falcons have to restructure his contract to avoid paying that roster bonus. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll see if the Falcons get fancy in terms of how they restructure that contract, or God forbid the Falcons do the unthinkable and extend Matt Ryan beyond 2023 or 2024, whenever his contract expires. So we'll just sort of see how that goes. The other 4 big contracts that are going to be question marks heading into this offseason include Jake Matthews. I would be surprised at this point in time if the Falcons move on from Jake Matthews, despite having a rough outing today. He's still one of the 2, proving good offensive linemen, and dumping him would basically mean that the Falcons would need to replace up to 4 new starters, and that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for this team at this point in time. So I think they'll probably restructure Jake Matthews and then play it by ear in 2023, similar to what I think the plan is going to be with Matt Ryan. Calvin Ridley, of course, his status is up in the air. We've already talked about on Friday that he may have played his last game in Atlanta. If you buy into what Steve Weish was reporting on 92.9 The Game, or was saying on 92, he wasn't really reporting anything. He was just guessing. But if you think that's a very educated guess, then we may be heading in that direction. I don't think the door is fully closed on Calvin Ridley returning. And certainly we'll have more to talk about whether or not he should return, or whatever the case, later this offseason. But we'll save that for later. But it does seem like it may be heading in that direction, that Calvin Ridley is done in Atlanta, and we'll see what the Falcons can get back for him via trade. But that does, if they do decide to move on from Calvin Ridley, that opens up a massive hole at their wide receiver position, a hole that I don't know if the Falcons can really afford to create, but we'll just sort of see how that goes. On the defensive side of the ball, you have Deion Jones. The expectation is that he will be traded. Hopefully the Falcons get something decent in return for him. They might have to just kind of give him away, given his play this season, his poor play this season, and the fact that he has still a lot of money left on his contract. And the new team, we're not doing a new team any favors by forcing them to have to inherit the remainder of that contract. I think it's like $22 million over the next 2 years. Ideally, you want to get like a 3rd or 4th round pick for Deion Jones, but you might wind up settling for a 6th or 7th round pick. And as I've explained previously on the podcast, at this point in time, it's just kind of a salary dump. You don't want to pay Deion Jones $20 million next year. And if you can cut that in half, then, for a 6th round pick, then it's worth it to you, in my opinion, for the Falcons. Even if it's not, the ideal return on investment at this point in time, it's just a salary dump. So hopefully Deion Jones will land on his feet somewhere. Maybe going to a team like the Jets or somewhere else, one of those teams that plays similar style defense that we played under Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris, which is a lot of middle of the field close, cover 1, cover 3 type of stuff, where he seems to be a better fit in that style of defense than what Dean Pease is trying to bring here, with more split safety looks and middle of the field opens type of stuff. Moving on to Grady Jarrett, in addition to Calvin Ridley being a big question mark on offense, Grady Jarrett seems to be the biggest question mark on defense in terms of his future status. I think the Falcons will keep him. I feel more optimistic that the Falcons will keep him because I think he's part of what Dean Pease is trying to build defensively. But the Falcons, could trade him and wind up saving like $16 million in salary cap saves. They could also extend him. I don't think they're likely to extend him. I just don't feel like the team is in a position to give out big money contracts at this point in time, but we'll just sort of have to see. Um, you know, given how poor the Falcons pass rush is currently, you'd only be making that worse by trading away Grady Jarrett, despite the fact that he's going to get a lot of criticism from a lot of fans because he only had like 2 sacks this year or whatever the case may be. But longtime listeners know how much I think sacks are overrated when it comes to evaluating individual players. We'll leave that for another day. So we'll just have to sort of see. I don't expect the Falcons to be splurging in free agency. Um, I think if they are going to make any splashes in free agency, my best guess is it'll come on the offensive line. But I think you'll probably see a lot more mid-level signings this year than we saw last year, where last year they were just kind of going with only cheap guys. I think you'll still probably see a lot of cheap guys brought in, and or guys that they liked from this season brought back on cheap contracts. But you'll probably see a little bit more mid-level guys, but probably not any major splashes, maybe on the offensive line in terms of that. So we'll just sort of have to see how it goes. I don't see the Falcons making massive moves. I think they'll be able to manipulate the cap to the point where they'll have considerable cap space, but I'm not convinced that this new regime is going to use it to get aggressive in free agency and quote unquote win the offseason, as they say. But we'll see how that goes. It's hard to guess what this new regime is thinking. And we're going to learn a lot more about whether this team is rebuilding this offseason. I know a lot of people will hear the news about Matt Ryan and say, oh, well, he's staying, so it's clearly not a rebuild. And it's like, well, it kind of depends on what happens with Jones, Ridley, and Jarrett. In a world where the Falcons trade all three of those guys, despite the fact that they're keeping Matt Ryan, means that they're kind of rebuilding. If they, especially Jarrett, really, I think is really the indicator that they're rebuilding. Jones is not, trading Jones is not really an indication of rebuilding. And if they trade Ridley, it's just going to be because of circumstances led to a rift there, not because they are necessarily rebuilding. I don't think that was part of their plan. Jarrett, if they trade him, that is truly signaling that they're rebuilding, even if they won't say it out publicly. So, my guess is that they'll probably stick with that kind of straddle the fence strategy. Basically, they'll avoid big financial commitments this offseason, sort of keep their cap situation in control for the future, but they'll add enough talent to kind of tread water and hopefully make a potential playoff run and build off of this season. We'll see if they can. I just think they're just kind of treading water until they can find a better option at quarterback. No offense to Matt Ryan, but coming off of this season, it's hard to really buy into the notion that his best football is ahead of him, as what we were trying to convince ourselves when we hired Arthur Smith, that he's going to have this Ryan Tannehill type of resurgence and potentially get back to playing close to an MVP level like we saw in 2016 and in 2018. It's still possible, but particularly in a world where the Falcons are trading away Calvin Ridley and probably not in a position to replace him with a comparable talent, at least a comparable talent to the 2020 version of Calvin Ridley, which is what they kind of need. It's going to be tough for Matt Ryan to have that sort of resurgence unless the offensive line makes a huge leap forward and the running game makes these are all things that we'll continue to unpack in the offseason, but it's hard for me to necessarily be overly optimistic that Matt Ryan's due for a great season. I think he'll be better next year, but I don't know if he's going to be, playing at a really, really high level like we kind of hope. So we'll just sort of have to see how that plays out. And if that happens, then, we'll see how that plays out against a much tougher schedule in 2022 than what the Falcons are facing this year, where I think technically they finished their schedule with like the tied for the fourth easiest schedule in the league this year. Don't know what their schedule looks like next year. We'll find out, but I know who they're playing. Well, we don't know who the 17th game is because of the Sunday night game between the Chargers and Raiders, but we know the other 16 games. So I know their schedule's gonna be tougher, but where it stacks up compared to other teams based off of this year's records, I don't know that. So there's still a lot more to unpack about this team, and sort of if they rebound in 2022, things will be favorable. If they don't, then who knows what their situation is going to be. I don't know, but it's hard to paint a rosy picture moving forward unless they can really nail this offseason. So we'll see how it all goes. Obviously, there's so much to unpack, and we'll do so. We'll have some guests on this week, hopefully, to give their thoughts on the Falcon season and what's next for them at some point. I don't know if it's going to be this week or next week that we'll start our positional year-end reviews. starting with the quarterback position. So we'll definitely be talking about Matt Ryan sooner rather than later on the podcast. And we'll just sort of have to see. I'll have to schedule that out. I haven't figured that out yet. But hopefully, like last year, we'll get it done by the Super Bowl or whatever the case may be. That's the plan. So we'll see if the schedule works out that way. So that's what's in store for Locked On Falcons over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And obviously we got a lot of stuff to unpack in terms of the offseason draft stuff. We'll be slowly unveiling draft coverage. I don't know, we'll have to see what the higher ups at Locked On say, but usually the mock draft Mondays don't start until after the Monday after the Super Bowl. So we'll start getting more into the draft and combine once that happens and whatever the case may be. But for the immediate future, we'll be focused on recapping the season. So that's what's in store for us here on Locked On Falcons. But what's in store for you this postseason? Of course, you want to check out the Locked On Bets podcast in addition to heading over to onlinegambling.com. Of course, Lee Sterling's giving you those tips, those daily picks, those blowout specials, and of course his lock of the day each and every day on the Locked On Bets podcast on the same podcast platforms wherever you find the Locked On Falcons podcast. So go subscribe to the Locked On Bets podcast so that you can make money this postseason. Guys, that's going to do it for us. We'll be back tomorrow with additional content. Don't quite know. I'll see if I can get a guest, but we'll see what happens and put a button on the season, I guess, potentially, or whatever the case may be. So if you have any feedback that you want to provide, of course, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or of course, you can leave a comment on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So appreciate it, guys. Until then.